When I was around 8 or 9, we lived in a quiet neighborhood tucked away in a cul-de-sac, the kind of place where every house looked the same and nothing much ever happened. It was the type of neighborhood that felt like its own little world. Just one long loop of houses surrounded by thick trees and fences that seemed too tall for how low the houses were. Our house was near the back of the street, backed by an enormous backyard. To a kid, it felt like a field. You could run full speed for what felt like forever and still not reach the fence at the very end. There was one corner of that yard, though, the back right side, where none of us ever went. Even our dog avoided it. He would run around the yard, bark at birds, chase squirrels, but if a ball rolled too far in that direction, he'd stop short, whine, and wait for someone to get it. That part of the yard always felt off. Not just scary in the way kids get scared of shadows. More like your skin tightened up as you got closer, like something was watching. There was a rusted flat trailer sitting in that corner, the kind you use to tow dirt bikes or lawn equipment. It looked like it had been there forever. One of the tires was sunken halfway into the ground and weeds had grown up through the metal bars. I don't know why we never moved it. It had no use, no purpose, and yet it stayed. My dad used to say he'd haul it off someday, but he never did. Inside the house, my 2 younger sisters shared a bedroom. They were about 2 and 4 years younger than me. Every once in a while, they'd leave their room and come sleep on the floor in mine. They said they saw weird lights in their room at night. I didn't think much of it. My parents told them it was just the glow of the streetlights bouncing off the windows. That made sense to me. It was a small neighborhood, and the streetlights were tall and bright. They looked orange through the curtains. Still, they kept coming into my room, whispering to each other, dragging their blankets in like ghosts. Nothing really happened, not for a while. Life went on. School, TV, backyard play, sleep. But then one night I woke up, not from a sound or a bad dream, just this strange, heavy feeling. The kind of feeling where your whole body is suddenly awake before your mind even realizes it. I remember my eyes were already open. The room was mostly dark, but there was enough light leaking in from the hallway nightlight that I could see the shape of the doorway. And there was someone standing in it, just standing, not moving, just this solid, tall shadow. There was one small red light, like the cherry of a lit cigarette, glowing near the figure's face. Both my parents smoked. That was the first thing that came into my head. Maybe one of them had come in to check on me and was having a cigarette. But they never smoked indoors. Not once. Still, I sat up in bed, rubbed my eyes and said, "Mom? Dad?" Nothing. And just like that, the figure was gone. The red light was gone. I didn't hear footsteps. The hallway didn't creak like it usually did when someone walked on it. It was just gone. I remember I sat frozen for a few seconds. Then I dove under the covers, like a little kid trying to disappear. I tucked my knees into my chest and made the blanket as tight around me as possible. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. Then the blanket tugged. First it was soft, just a small pull near my feet. I didn't move. Then it tugged again, harder. Not like something got caught. Felt like fingers, like someone was slowly trying to pull the covers off the bed from the bottom. I held onto the blanket with both hands, digging my fingers into the fabric. I didn't make a sound, just stayed there holding on, sweating. Eventually, the tugging stopped. I didn't move for what felt like an hour. I must have fallen asleep at some point because the next thing I remember was morning light coming through the window. I told my parents what happened. They just looked at each other and told me it must have been a dream. They swore they hadn't been in my room, said maybe it was a bad night terror. That explanation stuck. I wanted it to be a dream. I needed it to be. Years passed. We moved out of that house when I was in middle school. Nothing that dramatic ever happened again while we lived there, but I never forgot it. I think about it once in a while, especially when I couldn't sleep. Then I started dreaming about that house. Not all the time, just every so often. But the dreams were always the same. I'd be in the house, but it was different, like bigger somehow, with more rooms than I remembered. There was always a staircase going down, even though the Real house had no second floor. In the dream, I'd go down those stairs into the den area, which was this small garage-turn living space off the kitchen in real life. In the dream, though, the den had this corner that was just pure blackness. like looking into a hole that swallowed light. I knew that if I stepped too close to it, something would pull me in. I never saw what it was, just felt it. Sometimes in the dreams, I'd try to run out of the house and go to the neighbors, but the other houses weren't safe either. They felt just as wrong. I always woke up sweating, heart racing, but I never told anyone about those dreams. It just felt stupid to bring it up. That was until one night years later. I was visiting my mom and one of my younger sisters. She was the one who used to crawl into my room with a blanket when we were kids. We were having wine in the kitchen, just talking about old times, and somehow that house came up. My sister got quiet and said she still had dreams about it too. I asked her what kind of dreams. She said there was always this staircase that didn't exist, leading down into the kitchen. The cupboards would slam open and shut by themselves, and there was always a man standing near the den, just watching her. She never saw his face. I felt sick, because we had never talked about those dreams before, not once, and yet hers were almost exactly like mine. The staircase, the den, the man, the wrongness of the place. Our mom, who had been quiet for a while, finally said she never liked that house either. She used to get migraines in the den, and there was something about the backyard corner that always gave her goosebumps. She said sometimes at night she would hear what sounded like a metal dragging sound out by the trailer, but every time my dad checked, there was nothing. I've driven by that house a couple times over the years. It looks the same dull beige paint, same cracked driveway. But even just turning onto that street makes the hairs on my arms stand up. It's like walking into a memory that doesn't want you there. I don't believe in ghosts. I really don't. I believe in messed up wiring, strange dreams, unexplained noises, normal stuff that we can't always make sense of. But whatever happened in that house, it left a mark. On me, on my sister, maybe on all of us. We didn't talk about it when it was happening. We just lived with it like background noise. But now that I've looked back at it all, I realize that none of it was normal. We weren't haunted by a ghost. It wasn't some spirit from an ancient grave. It was just something wrong with that place. Maybe something about the land or the people who built it or what happened there before we moved in. But it was real enough to follow us into our dreams for decades. And now, even with time and distance, I still can't shake the feeling that whatever it was, it's still there. My friend Jake and I used to go running most evenings after school. We weren't part of any official track team or anything like that. We just liked getting out of the house, putting on our old sneakers, and running whatever paths we could find around our area. There was something calming about it. Some days we stuck to sidewalks, but when we had the energy and the daylight, we looked for trails. Dirt paths, hills, back roads, anything that got us out of the usual suburban sprawl. There was one trail in particular that we both really liked. It started at the back of a park near the edge of town and led up this narrow dirt path that climbed steeply up a hill. At the top was a ridge that gave a full view of the valley below. That part of the valley wasn't very developed. Just open fields, scattered trees, and a few clusters of cows grazing in the distance. A couple old wooden fences lined some parts of the trail, broken and sagging in places. You could tell the land had probably been used for ranching decades ago. Even now, there were still signs of livestock, hoof prints, the occasional cow, sometimes a pile of droppings right in the middle of the trail. It wasn't the most scenic place in the world, but we liked it. It was quiet. Not a lot of people came through, especially late in the afternoon. That day, it was maybe 5:30 p.m. The sun was low but still bright enough to make everything gold. The trees cast long shadows over the trail, and the only sounds were the wind, our shoes hitting the dirt, and the occasional rustle of leaves or buzzing insect. We had been running for about 15 or 20 minutes. The first part of the trail was tough, steep enough that your calves burned halfway up. After we reached the top of the ridge, we usually took a break. That day was no different. We slowed to a walk, catching our breath. I remember the sweat running down the back of my neck, the way my shirt stuck to my skin. Jake was maybe 10 feet ahead of me, and he looked back once to say nothing, just nodded. We didn't talk much during runs, but we didn't have to. We knew the rhythm of each other's pace. We had just crested a bend in the trail when we heard it. It wasn't loud at first, more like a distant croak or groan, enough to make us pause, thinking maybe it was an animal somewhere off in the trees. But then it happened again, louder this time, closer. There's no way to describe it in a way that does it justice. It wasn't a bark or a growl or a howl. It sounded alive, yes, but not right. It had that wrong pitch that makes your body react before your mind can catch up. A wet, choking, drawn-out sound, like something trying to imitate the way a dying animal might cry out, but getting it completely, horribly wrong. Like something had learned how to mimic a real animal but hadn't quite figured out how it was supposed to sound. There was no rhythm to it, no pattern, just broken, irregular noise, a kind of rattling behind it like bones shifting or something caught in a throat. I froze instantly. Jake did too. He was maybe 6 feet from me now, both of us completely still. We didn't say anything, we just stood there, staring ahead into the trees. The sound had come from maybe 20-30 feet to our right, behind a line of thin trees and brush just off the trail. Not thick woods, but just enough to block whatever it was from sight. The air suddenly felt heavy, the way it does before a storm when everything goes still. No wind, no rustling, even the bugs had stopped buzzing. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. I remember the exact way the sweat started to dry on my skin and the way my knees tensed like they were getting ready to run without needing permission. We heard it again, closer now, not just loud but near. It wasn't moving toward us, not yet. It sounded like it was crouched low or close to the ground, maybe shifting its weight or dragging something. The bushes didn't move much, but you could hear something wet, heavy, like a body being pulled across damp leaves. That noise and that sound. That horrible, god-awful sound. It was wrong. Wrong in the way that smell is wrong when something has died and rotted in the sun too long. I didn't know what it was, but my body was screaming at me. Every hair on my neck was standing up, and my gut had twisted into something solid and cold. I've only felt that exact feeling once more in my life, and it was years later during a college field trip to an anatomy lab. One of the bodies had been preserved in this old chemical that hadn't been cleaned properly. The moment the air hit it and that smell rolled through the room, I had to fight the urge to throw up. It wasn't just the smell. It was the way it told every part of your body that something was deeply wrong, that you were somewhere you were not supposed to be. That exact feeling slammed into me here in the woods as that sound, whatever it was, happened a third time. We didn't wait. I don't remember deciding to move, and I don't think Jake did either. We just turned around at the same time and started jogging back down the trail. Not a full sprint, not yet, but fast enough that our breathing got shallow and the sound of our feet on the dirt picked up. We didn't look back. We didn't need to. The noise didn't follow, at least not in a way we could hear. But I swear, as we moved further downhill, I felt that presence, whatever it was, watching us. Not chasing, just watching, like it knew we were scared, and that was enough. We didn't stop running until we hit the edge of the park. By then, the sun was almost gone, and the last light was fading fast. We didn't talk. We didn't even look at each other for a while. I sat on the curb next to the parking lot, feeling the shaking in my legs and arms. Jake just stood there, breathing hard, staring back toward the hill like he was waiting for something to appear at the top. We never went back to that trail again. Not once. We never talked to anyone about it either. Not because we were trying to hide anything, but because there was nothing we could say. We didn't see anything. We didn't have proof. Just a sound. A sound that made every cell in my body scream to get away. Even now, I'll be out walking somewhere quiet, and the wind will shift, or I'll hear an animal cry out in the distance, and my body will tense without warning. It's not the sound itself. It's the memory of that sound, of how wrong it felt. I don't know what kind of animal it was. I've listened to recordings online of coyotes, cougars, owls, even injured livestock. None of them come close. And I know it wasn't something mechanical. It wasn't a car or a machine. It was alive. It was breathing. And whatever it was, it wasn't supposed to be there. Not that close. Not that quiet. Not like that. I don't have a clean explanation to offer. All I know is that sometimes your body knows things your brain can't process. And when that kind of instinct kicks in, when everything in you says no, get out, leave now, you listen. You run. It happened about 5 years ago when I was 12 years old. My family had just moved to Querétaro, Mexico from the United States. Everything felt different. The streets, the smells, even the way the air felt on my skin. I remember those first few months being confusing and uncomfortable. I missed my old friends, my school, even the cold weather. But we had to move. My dad had lost his job in the States and things had gotten tight. So we packed up and left. We didn't have a place of our own when we got to Mexico. My grandma offered to let us stay at her house for a while, and we ended up living there for about 2 years. Her house was in a rough part of town, the kind of place where people didn't go out too late at night, and you always had to watch your back even during the day. The streets were narrow and full of potholes. Old walls lined the sidewalks, stained from years of weather and graffiti. The streetlights barely worked, and the ones that did gave off this weak orange glow that made everything look blurry and strange. My mom never felt safe leaving the car parked outside the house, even for a few hours. So she paid a guy who ran a makeshift parking lot 2 blocks away. It wasn't really a proper lot, just a fenced-off patch of concrete behind an old warehouse. The guy who watched over it lived in a little shack next to the gate. It was cheap, and it kept the car safe. But it meant every morning, around 5 o'clock, we had to walk those 2 blocks in the dark to go get the car and drive to school. I remember those walks well. The streets were always empty. You'd hear dogs barking in the distance or the occasional car passing by. The air was cold and damp that early in the morning, and everything felt kind of still, like the world was holding its breath. My mom always held my hand tightly. My little brother usually stayed behind with my dad until it was time for them to leave later. One morning, about 6 or 7 months after we'd settled into Grandma's place, something happened. Something I've never been able to explain. We left the house like usual, quietly slipping out through the rusty gate in front. My mom locked it behind us, and we began walking down the narrow sidewalk. The street was completely empty. Not a single car, not a single person, just the sound of our footsteps and a few crickets chirping somewhere. The sky was still pitch black, but the faintest hint of blue had started creeping in. It was that weird in-between time, not quite night, not quite morning. As we reached the halfway point between the house and the parking lot, my mom suddenly stopped walking. I took another step forward before I realized she wasn't next to me anymore. When I turned to look at her, I could see her face clearly even in the dim light. Her eyes were wide open, her mouth slightly parted. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, frozen, like she was trying to listen to something very carefully. I looked around, confused. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. Just the wind moving lightly through the trees. Then my mom slowly raised her arm and pointed toward a tree across the street. It was a small tree, not more than 10 meters away. I followed her hand and squinted. At first, I didn't see anything, just the trunk and some low branches. But then I saw it. Something peeked out from behind the tree. It was small, maybe the size of a child. It leaned out slowly, as if trying to get a better look at us. At first, I thought it was a kid playing around, maybe someone from the neighborhood. But there was something off about the way it moved. Something unnatural. The skin was pale gray. It looked smooth, almost rubbery, like the surface of a balloon. Its head was too big for its body, round and hairless. It had 2 huge, dark eyes, completely black, no whites, no pupils. Its ears stuck out in a pointy way, kind of like an elf from cartoons, but thinner and longer. It had no clothes, but it wasn't exactly naked either. It looked like its whole body was one uniform color and texture, like it didn't need clothes in the first place. It didn't make a sound. It didn't move like a person. It tilted its head slightly, like it was curious, studying us. And then it vanished behind the tree again. A second later, it peeked out once more, this time a little farther, like it was teasing us or trying to see how close it could get without us running. My whole body felt frozen. I didn't say anything. I didn't breathe. I just stared. Every instinct I had was telling me that whatever I was looking at wasn't human. It wasn't a costume, and it wasn't a dream. Then, all at once, my mom grabbed my hand and started pulling me in the opposite direction. She didn't say a word, but she walked fast, dragging me with her. I looked over my shoulder and saw the thing peek out one last time. Then it darted back behind the tree and took off running in the opposite direction. Its movement was fast, way faster than any human could run, and completely silent. It didn't make any noise as it ran off into the shadows. We took a longer route that morning, going around a few blocks to get to the parking lot from the other side. The whole time, my mom didn't say a word. She just gripped my hand tightly and kept glancing behind us. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to tell myself I imagined it, that maybe it was just a stray kid in a weird mask. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. For years, we never spoke about it. It felt like one of those things you convince yourself didn't happen just to make it easier to forget. But I never really did. That image, the way it looked, the way it moved, it stayed burned in my head. Then, a few years later, when I was around 15, I was reading random stuff on the internet. I started looking into strange sightings, aliens, government cover-ups, just out of curiosity. I wasn't really expecting to find anything serious. But then I came across an image in some obscure forum. It was a drawing, not a photo, but it looked exactly like the thing I saw. Same gray skin, same huge black eyes, same pointy ears, same small frame. The person who made the post described seeing something similar in a forest in South America years ago. They said it wasn't a gray like in movies. This one was different, almost childlike, but with a sense of intelligence in its eyes. I sat there, staring at the screen for a long time. I hadn't told anyone about that morning, not even my friends. It felt too weird, too hard to explain without sounding crazy. But seeing that image made me realize I wasn't alone. Someone else had seen it, or something like it. To this day, I have no idea what it was. I never saw it again. We moved out of my grandma's place the next year to a better part of town. Life went back to normal. I finished school. I got older, but I never forgot that morning. I don't tell this story often. Most people would just laugh or shrug it off. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a kid playing games. It was real. And whatever it was watching us. My Nan had a very close friend from her younger days, someone she'd met during her early nursing years. They had worked long shifts together, stayed in touch through marriages, children, and everything life had thrown at them. Even as they got older, settled into families of their own, they still kept in regular contact. That friend's ex-husband was someone my Nan had only met a few times, but she knew him enough to remember that he had always seemed a little on edge, polite but quiet. One of those people who looked like they carried something heavy inside. Back in the early 70s, when my dad was just a few weeks old, my Nan was home alone a lot. My granddad worked night shifts at a factory and was gone from early evening until the morning. Nan had just given birth and was still adjusting to the exhaustion of a newborn. She was often tired, breastfeeding every few hours, barely sleeping, doing everything herself. She didn't have the luxury of help or rest. Just her, the baby, and their dog, Ben. A big, calm Labrador they'd had for years. Ben had grown up with the older kids, always gentle, never aggressive. He never even barked at the postman. One day, her friend's ex-husband called. He said he wasn't feeling well and just needed someone to talk to. Said he was struggling and just wanted a bit of company. Nan told him gently that she couldn't come over, that she had a newborn who needed feeding constantly. She remembers him being quiet on the other end for a moment, and then he said something like, "Okay, I'll see you soon then," before he hung up. She didn't think too much of the call at the time. She was too tired to overanalyze his words, and people often said vague things when they were upset. But she did feel a little heavy after the call, like something had settled on her chest, some dull weight she couldn't explain. She tried to push it away. That night, around 9 p.m., the fire was on. Nan was sitting in her armchair with my dad asleep in a small basket near her feet. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in old homes late at night. She was half dozing, letting the heat from the fireplace warm her legs. She hadn't heard from Granddad and assumed he was doing his usual shift and would be home after sunrise. Then the front gate creaked open. It was a very distinct sound. Nan had specifically asked Granddad to put a certain kind of spring and hinges on that gate so it would always make a noise when opened. It gave her peace of mind when she was alone, knowing she could hear if anyone came up to the house. At first, she didn't react much. She thought maybe Granddad had forgotten something or had been sent home early. She waited, expecting to hear footsteps coming to the door, but the steps never came. Nothing, just silence again. Ben, who had been lying on the rug in front of the fire, suddenly got up. He didn't bark straight away. He stiffened, ears forward, eyes locked on the front door. His body was tense, his tail low, and his breathing changed. Nan said she had never seen him behave like that before. Not even when one of the kids had once gotten stuck in the shed and screamed for help. Ben had always been calm, always composed. But that night, something in him switched. He started to growl deep in his throat, a low rumble that she felt through the floorboards. Then he barked, loud, one sharp bark that echoed through the house. He took a step forward toward the door but didn't move any closer, just stood there staring. Nan tried to stand up. She thought maybe some kids were playing a prank or someone had walked past and triggered Ben's instincts. But as she tried to move, she couldn't. She said it wasn't like being held down or anything dramatic like that. Her body just wouldn't respond. She was sitting upright in the chair, her arms resting on the armrests, and she couldn't lift them, couldn't move her legs, couldn't speak. She was wide awake and fully alert, but her body felt disconnected. She also said she felt cold. Not the kind of cold you get from a draft or when the fire goes out. A deep, unnatural cold that sank into her skin. The fire was still burning strong, and yet she felt like she was sitting outside in winter with no coat on. The air had a kind of weight to it, like it had thickened and turned still. For about 2 minutes, she just sat there, unable to move, her eyes locked on the door, with Ben still barking and growling, his whole body trembling like he was ready to pounce or run. Then it all stopped. The cold lifted. Her body relaxed. She could breathe again. The barking stopped. Ben sat back down, though still visibly alert. A moment later, she heard the front gate open again and swing shut. She didn't go to the door. She didn't check outside. She just sat there, holding the baby close, rocking slowly until the fire died down and she fell asleep in the chair. In the morning, Granddad came home and found her still asleep in the chair with the baby in her arms. She told him everything. About the gate, the barking, how she couldn't move, how cold it had gotten, how strange the air had felt. He listened quietly and then sat down heavily in the chair across from her. He didn't speak right away. Then he told her something that made her skin go cold again. Her friend's ex-husband, the man who had called the night before, had died. He'd taken his own life at about 8:50 p.m., not long after their phone call. He'd been found in his flat by a neighbor a little later that night. The police had estimated the time of death by the condition of the body and the time the neighbor reported hearing a loud thud through the wall. He lived about a 10-minute walk from my Nan's house. Nan didn't say anything for a long time after hearing that. She just sat there, holding the baby tighter, staring at the fire that had long gone out. She said later that she didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that, but she was sure of one thing. Someone had come to the house that night. Whether he changed his mind and turned back, or whether it was something else entirely, she didn't know. But someone had been at the gate. Someone had stood silently outside the door. Someone had come and then left. And Ben, the most gentle, harmless dog she'd ever known, had known it wasn't right. She never heard the gate creak like that again without checking. After that night, she always double-locked the door before sunset and never sat alone in that front room without pulling the heavy curtains shut. And though she never said it outright, I think part of her always believed that the man had come to say goodbye, or maybe to talk one last time. But something, maybe the baby, maybe Ben, had kept him outside. She told me this story years later, when I was old enough to understand what it meant. She never told it for drama, never added anything extra. Just a plain memory she carried with her. One night, one moment, one visitor who never knocked. Started on a random Tuesday afternoon. I was driving home from work. The same route I always took, the same streets, the same turns, nothing unusual. It had been a long day at the office. Back-to-back meetings, a headache that just wouldn't quit, and I hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. I remember thinking I'd stop by the small grocery store near my apartment to grab something quick for dinner. Maybe frozen pasta or microwave rice, something fast and easy. I was about 10 minutes from home when I noticed a small, silver hatchback behind me. Nothing strange about that, except it had been tailing me pretty closely for the last few turns. At first, I didn't think much of it. People drive like idiots all the time in this city. Maybe they were just in a rush. I made a right turn, and so did they. Then another right, then a left. Still behind me. I changed lanes randomly, and after a second's delay, so did they. I remember staring into my rearview mirror a little longer than normal. The car looked normal. Slight dent on the front bumper, no visible license plate on the front, which was illegal but not unheard of. Tinted windows, too dark to see who was inside. At that point, I wasn't scared. More irritated. I took a longer route just to see. 5 extra minutes. Still behind me. My stomach was growling by the time I pulled into the grocery store parking lot. I didn't see the hatchback when I parked, so I figured maybe they'd finally gone their way. I went inside, grabbed a few things, paid, and walked out. The hatchback was parked 2 rows behind my car. I stopped mid-step. It wasn't there when I arrived. I was sure of that, and now it was there, sitting with the engine off. No one inside. I walked to my car slowly, not taking my eyes off the silver car. I unlocked the door, tossed the bag on the passenger seat, and got in. Before I even started the engine, I locked the doors. Just sat there for a second, then turned the key. As I backed out, I glanced at the hatchback again. Still empty, but something didn't sit right. I drove straight home, kept checking my mirrors the whole way. No one followed me this time. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of a small, older building. No elevators, just a dimly lit stairwell that always smelled like mildew and cheap cleaning spray. I parked in my usual spot, took the stairs up, and unlocked my door. I remember that night in weird, clear bits. I heated the food, watched half an episode of some show, and turned it off. My mind kept drifting back to that car. I looked out my window once or twice. Nothing there. Around midnight, I went to bed. The next morning, I stepped out of my apartment and froze. On the windshield of my car was a folded piece of white paper. No envelope, just a single sheet tucked under the wiper. I scanned the parking lot. Empty, quiet. My stomach dropped. I walked over, snatched the paper, and opened it. No words, just a printed image. A photo of me, taken from behind, as I was walking into the grocery store the day before. My grocery bag was in my hand. You could see the back of my head, my jacket, even the outline of my keys in my hand. It was definitely me. There was no note, no threat, no explanation. Just the photo. I didn't go to work. I called in sick even though I wasn't. I spent the whole day inside. Checked every lock on every door and window in the apartment. Closed the curtains. Sat on the floor, phone in hand, trying to decide whether to call the police. But what would I say? That someone followed me and left a picture? It didn't seem like enough. It wouldn't be taken seriously. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound felt louder than usual. Every creak, every drip of the faucet. I left a light on in the hallway. Around 3 a.m., I finally dozed off. The next morning, I opened my door slowly, cautiously. No paper this time. I walked downstairs, scanning everything. Nothing on the windshield. I got in my car and sat there for a long time. Then I drove to a nearby hardware store and bought a dashcam. Installed it right there in the parking lot. If someone followed me again, I'd catch them this time. For the next few days, everything was normal. Nothing weird. No strange cars, no notes, nothing. I started to relax. Even told myself maybe it was just some dumb prank. Maybe it wasn't even meant for me, and I was just being paranoid. Then one evening, after work, I came home and found my front door slightly open, just a crack. I stood in front of it for maybe 30 seconds, frozen. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I hadn't touched the door yet. I backed away slowly and went back to my car. Sat there and thought. Then called the police. They arrived 20 minutes later. 2 officers. I waited in the car while they went up and checked everything. They said the place was empty. Nothing stolen, no signs of forced entry. But someone had definitely been inside. The kitchen drawer was half open. My bathroom cabinet door was hanging loose. My bedroom closet light was on, and I never leave it on. The officers looked around, shrugged, and said maybe I left it unlocked. I knew I hadn't. They said I could file a report if I wanted, but it wouldn't go anywhere unless something was stolen or I had more proof. I filed one anyway. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Sat on the couch with a baseball bat and the hallway light on. Every now and then I'd get up and check the locks again. Around 4 a.m., I started hearing footsteps in the apartment above me. Nothing unusual, people lived there, but that night it felt different. Slower, deliberate. I kept staring at the ceiling, listening. Then the footsteps stopped. Complete silence. In the morning, I went to work like normal, just trying to get back to routine. When I came back home that evening, the lock on my apartment was stiff. Not jammed, just different, like it had been messed with. That's when I made the decision to leave. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend across town. Told her it was just for a few days while my place got fumigated. I didn't tell her the real reason. Back at my apartment 2 days later, I found another paper under the doormat. This time it was a USB stick. I didn't plug it in right away. I stared at it for a while, unsure what to do. Then I drove to a nearby internet cafe, used one of their public computers, and opened the USB. There were 5 folders. Each one was labeled with a date, all recent. Inside, there were hundreds of photos and short video clips, all of them of me, walking to work, sitting in my car, buying groceries, standing in my kitchen, asleep in bed. They weren't old photos. They were recent. Some were from angles that meant the person had been inside my apartment, or at least right outside my window. One video showed me brushing my teeth. Another showed me lying on the couch, watching TV. In one, I was asleep, mouth slightly open, the blanket pulled halfway up. I shut the computer down and left the cafe. I didn't go back to my apartment. I went straight to the police, showed them the USB, filed a full report. This time, they took it seriously. An investigation started. They went through my apartment, checked everything again. Nothing. No cameras found, no hidden devices, no sign of forced entry. Nothing that could explain how those photos and videos had been taken. For the next few weeks, I stayed at different places, a friend's house, a motel, even in my car a couple of nights. I kept moving. I changed my phone number, got a new email, deactivated all my social media. Eventually, the police told me they had a suspect, a man who lived in the building across from mine. He had a criminal history, mostly stalking and trespassing. They got a search warrant and found a whole setup in his apartment. Telephoto lenses, wireless cameras, hacked Wi-Fi footage. He'd been watching me for months. They arrested him. The court process took months, but eventually he was charged. I didn't have to testify. He pled guilty. After that, I moved to a new city. Different apartment, different job, different everything. For a long time, I couldn't sleep properly. Every creak, every knock made me jump. I double-checked every lock, every curtain, every night. Even now, years later, I still feel it sometimes. That invisible pressure. The feeling that someone might be watching. Not because they are, but because someone once did. And it wasn't a ghost or a monster or some strange nightmare. It was a real person. A stranger who decided to follow me. Watch me. Break into my life piece by piece. And that's the part that scares me the most. Because it was real. When I was around 12, give or take a year, our house was going through some renovation work. Mostly exterior stuff, new siding, new windows, that sort of thing. For a few weeks, there were ladders leaned against the walls, tools scattered around the yard, and scaffolding propped up around the upper floors. It didn't bother me too much during the day, but at night, when everything was quiet and the house felt still, all that equipment outside started to take on a different kind of presence. It made me feel like our house wasn't quite sealed off from the outside world anymore. Like it was open, vulnerable, easy to reach. My bedroom was upstairs on the second floor, and my bed was pushed up against the wall, right beneath the windows. The windows ran along the entire length of the bed, which meant that when I was lying down, my head was basically inches away from the glass. I always liked that setup until one particular night. It was sometime after midnight. I was asleep, but then I stirred. I didn't bolt awake or anything, just sort of opened my eyes slowly because I thought I heard something. It wasn't a loud noise, more like the sound of something tapping. I stayed quiet, ears straining. Then there it was again, this soft but distinct tapping sound right near my head, against the window. I remember holding my breath, trying to decide whether I had actually heard it or if my brain was just being weird from sleep. It happened again. This time it sounded more like small pebbles flicking against the glass. I lay there still, staring at the ceiling, trying not to make a sound. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe it was wind knocking something loose, maybe a branch or something from the equipment setup was brushing against the window. But there weren't any trees close enough to reach that high up. Still, I forced myself to believe it. But then it happened again. Louder, more deliberate, like something was being thrown at the window from close range. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to look. I tried to stay as still as possible, hoping it would just go away if I didn't react. I laid frozen, my body tense under the covers. My eyes were wide open, staring blankly in the dark, but I didn't dare roll over and look out the window. Minutes passed. Then something changed. It went from tapping to scratching. Not constant scratching, short, quick scratches, like someone was dragging their fingernails lightly across the glass. That's when my breathing got fast. Couldn't help it. I felt like my heart was beating in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself it wasn't real, that I was dreaming, but I knew I wasn't. I wasn't dreaming. I was awake and there was someone outside my window. On the second floor, I kept imagining that I'd see a face if I turned my head. A face staring down through the glass, looking right at me. The scratching stopped for a second. Then I heard something that made my stomach flip. It was the sound of someone trying to open the window, like fingers fumbling with the latch. Not loud, but unmistakable. Slow, almost cautious, as if whoever it was didn't want to be heard, but wasn't being careful enough. That was enough. I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped out of bed and ran straight out of the room, heart pounding so hard it felt like my chest would explode. My parents' bedroom was literally next door, maybe 5 feet from mine, and I ran straight there. I didn't look back, didn't pause, just bolted down the hallway and yanked the door open. I tried to speak, but I was shaking too much. I remember standing there, barely able to get words out. My throat felt dry, my knees weak. My dad woke up, confused and groggy, and followed me back to my room. I stayed behind him as he pushed open the door. The room looked normal. Nothing seemed out of place. The curtains were still drawn. He went to the window and looked out. Then he sighed. It was my brother. Turns out he had snuck out of the house earlier in the evening, probably thinking he could just sneak back in the same way. Problem was, he'd forgotten to unlock the window from the inside. He'd climbed all the way up the scaffolding and was trying to get my attention without waking up our parents. Throwing pebbles, scratching the window, and eventually trying to open it himself. It backfired. Badly. He got caught. My dad was furious, but I was too shaken to even feel anything other than exhausted relief. I went back to bed, still jumpy, but at least I knew what it was. Years later, I was home from college during spring break. By then, everything had changed. My parents were divorced. My dad had moved out, and my mom was mostly staying with her now husband. The house wasn't really anyone's home anymore. It just existed as a place I could stay when I came back from school. A big, quiet house that felt emptier than it used to. I was living there alone for that week. Just me and my little dachshund, Sophie. One night, I was lying on the couch in the den, watching some dumb late-night TV show. It was probably around 11:30 p.m., and I remember being relaxed, stretched out under a blanket, the kind of stillness that makes you forget anything outside even exists. That didn't last long. Sophie was in the next room over, and I heard her start barking. First, I ignored it. She barked at everything. Stray sounds, shadows, squirrels, her own reflection. I called for her, thinking she'd come trotting in like always, but she didn't. She just kept barking. Not in a playful way either. This was that high-pitched, frantic bark she only did when something really got to her. I paused the TV and got up, walked out of the den and peeked into the dining room where she was. She was standing up on her hind legs, front paws pressed against the windowsill of the big floor-to-ceiling window. Her body was stiff, tail down, barking in rapid bursts at something outside. I followed her gaze but saw nothing, just darkness. That part of the house looked out over a big empty yard, almost the size of a small field. Beyond that were thick hedges and then nothing. No street, no sidewalk. It wasn't the kind of place where people just passed by. I called her again. She didn't even look at me. Her eyes were fixed outside. I could feel my chest tighten. I suddenly felt exposed, like someone could be watching me from out in the darkness. I grabbed my phone, opened the dial pad, typed in 911 and kept my thumb hovering over the call button. I walked slowly to the window, keeping close to the wall, heart hammering. I reached the edge and peered out, trying not to get too close to the glass. I scanned the yard. It was dark but not pitch black. There was a bit of moonlight, just enough to make out shapes. That's when I saw it. A white plastic grocery bag. It was floating a few feet off the ground, caught in the wind, spinning slowly as it drifted across the yard. It would rise, then fall, then rise again, gracefully, almost like it was dancing. Every time it caught the moonlight just right, it lit up faintly like a ghostly shape. That was what Sophie was barking at. Just a damn bag. I stood there for a moment, letting the tension drain out of me. My body was still tense, my hands still tight around my phone. I gave a weak laugh and turned back to Sophie. She was still barking. I picked her up and carried her back to the den, where she finally settled down once she couldn't see it anymore. I sat back down, stared at the paused TV, and realized how on edge I really was. Living alone in that house, so many rooms, so many windows, so much silence. It all had a way of making everything feel bigger than it was. A shadow wasn't just a shadow. A sound wasn't just a sound. And a plastic bag, floating across a moonlit yard, might as well have been something out of a nightmare. Nothing happened after that. No one broke in. No face in the window. No mysterious figure in the yard. Just a bag and a barking dog. But I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I thought something would happen, but because I had felt, for a few long minutes, like something already had. In high school, I had a close friend named Steve. We met during our first year, somewhere around late 2007, and quickly became part of a small friend group that would hang out almost every day after classes. We'd play video games, sit on curbs eating chips and drinking sodas, or just talk for hours about everything from school to music to dumb internet memes. Steve was the funny one, always cracking jokes and keeping the mood light. But one day, in between laughs and banter, he told us a story that didn't fit the usual tone. He said it happened to his older brother Tim a few years before, when Tim had just started college in New Hampshire. Tim had gone to school somewhere deep in the northern part of the state, a quieter town surrounded by trees and not a whole lot of anything. One night, sometime after 2 a.m., Tim and one of his college friends were just hanging out in their dorm, too wired to sleep. They got it in their heads that they needed Dunkin' Donuts, like not just wanted it, but actually needed it, and the closest one open at that hour was in a different state. I don't remember if Steve ever said which state, maybe Massachusetts or Vermont. I don't know much about New England geography. All I remember is he said the route they had to take was a narrow 2-lane highway that wound through dense woods, with no streetlights, no gas stations, nothing but trees and blackness for miles. According to Steve, Tim didn't think much of the drive at first. The road was empty, their car headlights barely cutting through the fog that had rolled in, and the jazz station on the radio was keeping the mood kind of mellow. They got to the Dunkin', grabbed their donuts and coffee, and started heading back. That's when things got weird. About 10 minutes into the return drive, a car pulled out in front of them from what seemed like nowhere. It was a red compact car, Steve said Tim couldn't tell what make or model it was because all the identifying emblems had been scratched or ripped off. The only thing Tim remembered clearly was the license plate. It had a large black O on the left and a bright green M on the right. No numbers, nothing else, just those two letters. At first, Tim thought maybe the driver was just another late-night traveler, maybe another college kid or some delivery driver. But then the radio, which had been playing some Miles Davis, suddenly glitched out and started playing Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit. Steve said Tim didn't even think the station had that kind of music. Right after that, Tim's phone lost service, even though they'd had at least 2 bars the whole way there. Could have all been a coincidence, sure. But as Steve told us the story, I could tell he didn't really believe that anymore. Tim got this uneasy feeling in his chest, like something was just off. He didn't want to be near OM anymore, so he took his foot off the gas. But when he slowed down, OM slowed down too. It wasn't like tailgating or road rage. OM just stayed the exact same distance ahead of them, as if the driver was watching them, reacting to them. It was unnatural, so Tim tried to speed up and pass him. But as soon as he did, OM sped up too, matching their speed perfectly, never letting them get any closer or farther. They drove like that for a while, not speaking, not joking, just focused. Both of them had gone from amused to tense to full-on terrified. At some point, they saw a curve up ahead in the road and watched as OM disappeared around it. That was when they decided to stop the car right there in the middle of the highway. They turned the engine off and just sat there. Neither of them said anything for what felt like 20 minutes. It was dark, and the only sound was the wind brushing against the car and the occasional rustling from the woods. Their coffees had gone cold. They were both trying to convince themselves that OM had just kept driving and it was all just a creepy misunderstanding. Eventually, they started the car again and moved forward, hoping it was over. But it wasn't. As soon as they turned around the curve, OM was there. Not far off in the distance, not parked, not driving away. He was exactly the same distance ahead of them as before. Still driving, still matching their pace. They were done pretending it was a coincidence. Tim gripped the wheel tight and just drove. He didn't care about the speed limit anymore. He didn't care about potholes or deer crossings or fog. He just wanted to be back at school. Never got closer, never fell behind. He was just there, like a shadow they couldn't shake. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they saw a fork in the road. One path led back to town, toward their dorm. The other veered deeper into the woods. They didn't even hesitate. Tim turned toward town, and OM, without slowing or signaling, took the other road and vanished into the trees. Tim never saw the car again, and for a while, he tried to convince himself it wasn't as terrifying as it felt. That maybe the guy was just messing with them. But something about it stayed with him, and when Steve told us the story, I could see that it had stayed with him too. None of us really believed it. Not all the way. It just didn't make sense. But then, about a year later, in 2008 or maybe early 2009, I was doing homework in my room while the radio played in the background. It was a local talk station, the kind my dad usually listened to. Suddenly, there was a news bulletin. A woman had witnessed a murder in a nearby county, just a couple towns over from ours. The killer had escaped, but the witness described the car that fled the scene. Red compact car, license plate with a black O and green M. I froze. I didn't even process the rest of the report. I just sat there, staring at the wall. It didn't make any sense. That was here. We were in suburban Orange County, California, nowhere near New Hampshire. I thought maybe I'd misheard. Maybe my brain was just playing tricks on me. But the next day at school, I saw Steve in the hallway. His face said it all. He had heard the same thing. Neither of us were crazy. OM was real. And apparently he was across the country. That changed something in me. I stopped finding the story funny or ridiculous. I started wondering how someone like that could exist. Someone who drives around in a deliberately unmarked car, targeting random people on highways in the middle of the night. I figured the state hopping was to confuse police. Maybe he didn't kill often, or maybe he was just good at hiding it. I didn't know, but I started to believe he was dangerous. Then came the second epilogue years later. It was May, I think, and our friend Blake had been out dropping off his girlfriend late at night. Around 2 a.m., same time as always. For some reason, he took the canyon route back home. A winding, isolated road with barely any lighting, surrounded by trees and steep rock walls. Partway through the drive, a car pulled in front of him. Red compact car, black O, green M. Blake knew the stories. He knew better than to try and pass or slow down. He stayed back as far as OM would allow him, practically crawling through that canyon. The moment they reached the end of the canyon road, OM pulled a sudden U-turn and headed back into the dark. Blake went straight home. He told us later that he didn't sleep that night, and honestly, neither did I when I heard about it. That was the last time I heard about OM. I've spent years wondering who he is, why he does what he does. Is it just a game to him? Is he looking for something? Or someone? I don't know. I still drive late at night sometimes. And every time I'm on a quiet road with no lights and no traffic, I think about that car. I look in the mirror. I scan the lanes ahead of me. I wonder if OM is still out there, waiting for another turn in the road. When I was around 8 or 9 years old, we lived in a house that my dad had built for us with his own 2 hands. It sat in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in rural Indiana, surrounded by thick woods, cornfields, and long gravel roads that got swallowed by the trees. We had no close neighbors, just open land, a long dirt driveway, and silence. You could hear everything out there, the wind through the trees, the occasional distant truck, and at night, the coyotes. My parents ran a small custom furniture business from our home. My dad worked out in a shop behind the house, and my mom handled all the paperwork and client meetings. Every now and then, clients would come out to see the work or finalize orders, which meant that strangers would occasionally visit our little homestead. Most of them were normal, polite people. Some were eccentric, but nothing out of the ordinary until the day that man came. I still remember it clearly. It was cold out, maybe late fall or early winter. The trees were bare, and the sky had that gray, dead look it always got before snow. My mom had baked something, and the kitchen smelled like cinnamon. I was in the living room with my brother, trying to build a fort with the couch cushions when we heard tires crunching on the driveway. I looked out the window and saw a sleek black car with tinted windows pulling up. It didn't match anything we'd seen around here. No rust, no dents, just spotless and shiny. A man stepped out, dressed entirely in black. Black shoes, black coat, black wide-brimmed hat, and black sunglasses, even though the sun wasn't out. He moved slowly, almost too slowly, and kept looking around like he was checking every corner of the property. Something about him made my stomach feel strange. Not scared exactly, just cold. He came inside and spoke with my parents in the front room. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I peeked around the corner once or twice. He never smiled. He barely blinked. What stood out to me most, though, was how his eyes kept drifting toward our cat, Mercedes. She was a black Persian with a thick coat and yellow eyes that seemed too big for her face. She was normally shy around new people, but she stared at him the whole time. Not curious, almost angry, like she hated him. After about half an hour, the man left. He didn't shake hands, didn't say goodbye to my brother or me, just walked out, got in his car, and drove off without even looking back. Later that night, at dinner, my parents both said he had a strange energy. My dad said he seemed off, and my mom said he was the kind of person who made the hairs on her neck stand up. My brother and I both agreed. We didn't know why, but we all felt it. That night, Mercedes started acting weird. She wouldn't come when we called her. She wouldn't eat. She kept crawling under furniture, hiding, and growling at empty corners of the room. By the next day, she started vomiting. But it wasn't normal. It was thick and black, almost like tar. She made awful sounds when it happened, like she was choking and crying at the same time. My parents took her to the vet, but they couldn't figure it out. They gave us some medicine to try, but nothing helped. Over the next few days, she got worse. She wouldn't let anyone near her. She'd swat at the air, hiss at nothing, and once she clawed my brother when he tried to pet her. A few days later, she died. It happened late in the evening. My mom had wrapped her in a towel and was sitting with her on the couch, trying to keep her warm. I was sitting on the floor nearby. Mercedes kept lifting her head and swiping at the air. Her eyes were wide and terrified, like she saw something coming. Right before she took her last breath, she let out a low growl and snapped at the air one last time. Then she went still. We buried her the next morning under the big tree at the edge of the property. It had started snowing lightly, and the ground was hard to dig. My dad and brother took care of it while I watched from the porch. The cold wind cut right through my jacket, but I didn't feel like going back inside. I just stood there, staring at that black spot under the tree where we left her. That's when things really started to change. It began small. We'd find footprints in the snow that didn't make sense. Footprints that would start in the middle of the yard and then disappear completely, no trail leading in or out. Sometimes they looked too long or too narrow, like they weren't shaped quite right. At night, I'd hear sounds in the walls, scratching, tapping, sometimes a knock. My mom blamed mice, so we put out traps, but they never caught anything. Wallpaper started peeling off the walls. At first, we thought it was the cold or humidity, but it wasn't consistent. One day we'd wake up and a whole chunk would be hanging loose like someone had clawed at it. My mom started acting different too. She was already sensitive to energy and stuff like that, but she became distant. She'd stare at nothing for long stretches of time. Once I found her crying in the hallway, staring at a blank wall. She wouldn't say what was wrong, just shook her head and walked away. I had asthma, but I hadn't had a serious attack in over a year. Not until one night in the middle of all this when it came back hard. That night, I was already feeling tight in my chest. My mom told me to sleep in their room so they could keep an eye on me. I made a little bed with blankets and pillows on the floor beside her side of the bed. Their room was a bit of a mess. There were boxes everywhere, stuff that hadn't been unpacked since we moved in. Family photo albums, gift wrap, old clothes. Most of it was pushed under the bed or stacked in the corners. At some point during the night, I woke up struggling to breathe. My chest felt like it had a heavy weight on it, and I couldn't catch my breath. I tried to call for my mom, but I couldn't get enough air. I remember seeing her wake up suddenly and scream. She jumped out of bed and tried to get to me, but something was stopping her. The boxes. Every single one of those boxes had been stacked up between me and the bed. Not just haphazardly either. They were arranged in a solid wall like a barricade. There's no way they fell that way on their own. She had to push and shove and knock them over to reach me. When she finally got through, she gave me my inhaler and just held me while I gasped and cried. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. I could hear her pacing the room. She never told me what she saw. Not then, not ever. But I knew it was something. The look on her face was pure terror. Over the next few weeks, things didn't get better. My dad brought in someone from church to bless the house. My mom started burning sage. We rearranged furniture, added more lights, anything to make it feel less heavy. Little by little, the strange things slowed down. The noises didn't stop completely, but they got less frequent. The wallpaper stopped peeling. I didn't have another asthma attack for a while. We never found a reason for any of it. There was no mold, no bad wiring, nothing that could have caused hallucinations or health issues. The vet never figured out what killed Mercedes. The black car never came back. Years later, my brother bought the house from my parents. He lives there with his wife and kids now. They've mentioned hearing weird sounds at night. Whispers, footsteps, things moving on their own, but nothing serious. Nothing like what happened that winter. I grew up to be a pretty skeptical person. I like to believe in logic, reason, science. But I've never been able to explain that year of my life. I don't talk about it much. I've told myself it was all in our heads. Some shared anxiety or trick of the mind. Maybe it was just stress or grief after losing Mercedes. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about that man in black. The way he looked at our cat. The way everything changed after he left. And I wonder if maybe, just maybe, something came into our house with him. Something that never fully left. It didn't happen to me, but it happened to my mom when she was a teenager sometime in the early 70s. She's in her mid-60s now. She's not overly religious, doesn't go to church every Sunday, doesn't quote the Bible, doesn't wear a cross around her neck or have those "God bless this home" frames hanging on the wall. But she prays every night, every single night without fail. It's not loud or dramatic, it's just something she does quietly before going to sleep. I always thought it was just a habit from growing up in a conservative household, something comforting to her, nothing more. But there are a few things that always stood out. One was her total refusal to entertain anything that involved exorcisms, possession, or Ouija boards. I mean, she could watch regular horror movies with ghosts or haunted houses. She never really liked them, but she'd sit through something spooky if it wasn't over the top. But if you even suggested watching The Exorcist, she would shut it down immediately. No hesitation, just a flat-out no. Not even angry, just firm. Same when I showed her the trailer for Constantine. She saw that scene with the girl crawling up the ceiling and she just got up and walked out. Didn't say a word, just refused to have it playing in the house. Then there's the thing with Ouija boards. If you so much as joke about bringing one into her house, she'll lose it. She'll yell, scream, curse. Seriously, she'll throw you out. No second chances. Doesn't matter who you are. Family, friend, neighbor, get out. I always thought that was excessive. Funny, even. Like, come on, it's just a toy from the board game section at Walmart. But she never laughed. Not once. I asked her once why she was so extreme about it. Why she wouldn't even talk about it. That was the only time she told me the story. And after hearing it, I've never asked again. She was about 16 or 17, still living in a small town in upstate New York. Quiet place. Everyone knew everyone else. One weekend, she stayed over at her friend Lisa's house with 2 other girls from school. It was supposed to be a fun night, pizza, junk food, games, maybe a scary movie. Lisa's parents were home, hanging out in the living room, watching TV. The girls spread out on the carpet in the den, flipping through board games. Monopoly, Clue, Life, and then one of them pulled out a Ouija board. My mom had never seen one before, didn't know what it was. She thought it was a joke, just another game. There were no warning labels back then, no YouTube videos of Ouija board gone wrong. It was just a board with letters and a plastic planchette. So they set it up, put their fingers lightly on the pointer, and started asking random, silly questions. Who has a crush on who, what boy would they marry, that kind of thing. Typical sleepover nonsense. Then they asked if anyone was there with them. The planchette moved. My mom thought someone was pushing it on purpose. So did the others. They laughed, accused each other, argued a bit, and asked again. It moved again, this time more deliberately. They asked, "What's your name?" The planchette began circling the board slowly, then landed on the letter D, then E, then V, I, L. They stopped. It wasn't funny anymore. The air felt different, heavier, as if the room itself was pressing in on them. They asked another question. If you're really the devil, then show yourself. That was when the lights in the whole house went out. All at once. Even the TV in the other room. Total darkness for about 2 seconds. Then everything snapped back on like nothing happened. They all froze. No one spoke. My mom said she didn't even breathe. Then one of the girls started laughing nervously and said it was probably just a power surge. But my mom remembered something she couldn't explain. She said the moment the lights came back on, the room felt cold. Not chilly, cold. Like being outside in winter with no coat. But no windows were open and the heat was on. And then, she looked at the TV screen, which was off now, dark and glossy like a mirror. And in the reflection, she saw something that should not have been there. A shape, a figure. She said it wasn't standing, it wasn't sitting exactly either. It was sort of hunched, big, dark, and it looked like it was right there beside them on the floor. Not behind them, not in another room, right there. But when she turned around, there was nothing. Just the 4 girls, the board, and the carpet. She didn't scream or move. No one did. But she saw the others staring at the screen too. Everyone saw it. And then the noise started. From the kitchen. Loud crashes. Clattering like someone throwing things off the counters. Cabinet doors opening and slamming shut. the fridge rattling. It sounded like someone was tearing the kitchen apart with bare hands. The parents came running in from the living room. Lisa's dad shouted something. My mom couldn't remember what, and they all stood there listening to the chaos in the next room. But when they went in, nothing was broken. Not a single thing was out of place. No pans on the floor, no drawers open. Everything was exactly where it should have been. They threw the Ouija board in the trash that night. Lisa's mom wanted to burn it, but her dad just stuffed it in a garbage bag and took it out to the bin at the end of the driveway. Nobody played games after that. The sleepover ended early. My mom slept on the couch with the lights on. So did Lisa and the other girls. They didn't even try to pretend they weren't scared. But it didn't end there. Around 3 or 4 in the morning, my mom woke up to a sound outside. She couldn't place it at first, just a distant clanking. Then she realized it was coming from above her, from the roof. Sounded like chains, not the rattling of a keychain or a dog collar, but heavy chains being dragged or dropped. Metal hitting shingles. She sat up, trying to listen, thinking maybe it was a dream. But then she heard another sound. Growling, low, guttural, more than one. Dogs, multiple dogs. On the roof, she stayed still, frozen, didn't move. The sound went on for what felt like forever. Sometimes the chains would jingle fast, like someone yanking them. Other times it would go quiet for a few seconds, then pick up again. Eventually, it stopped, just like that. No footsteps, no fading away, just silence. The next morning, she asked Lisa's parents if they had any neighbors with dogs that might have gotten loose. They looked at her like she was crazy. No one around here has dogs, they said. Then they looked at each other, kind of unsure, and admitted they had also heard the noise. Not just the chains, but the dogs too. They just hadn't said anything, thinking maybe it was a truck or something on the road. But it wasn't. It was too close, too real, and too high up. My mom left not long after that. She never went back to Lisa's house. She lost touch with those girls over the years. Moved away, got married, had kids. Life went on. But to this day, she won't talk about that night unless you really push her. And even then, she doesn't go into detail. She'll just say it was a mistake, something she'll regret forever. She truly believes they invited something that night. Not a ghost, not some silly spirit, something worse, something real, something that was just waiting for someone to call it. And honestly, after hearing that story in full, I believe her. Because every single time she told it, no matter how many years had passed, her hands would shake and her voice would go low, almost like she didn't want the house to hear her. And I swear to God, every time, I'd feel that same cold air she talked about, that same pressure, like the room was holding its breath. That's why I've never touched a Ouija board in my life, and I never will. I never used to believe in any of the stories. You hear enough ghost rumors in high school that they start to feel like a rite of passage. Just something people say to feel connected to the building or the people in it. But our school wasn't normal. It was old. Not just old like built in the 70s old, it was built in the 40s, and it still had parts of the original flooring, the original brick, and even some of the original plumbing. The walls were thick, and the halls echoed in weird ways. You could be walking and hear a cough or a door creak and have no clue where it came from. But that wasn't really enough to convince me. Not at first. Then I joined DECA. Our advisor, let's just call him Mr. R, was a pretty normal guy on the surface. He was friendly but had a really dry sense of humor. Smart, practical, didn't really strike you as someone who believed in ghosts or any of that stuff. But every year, he took the club members on what he called a ghost hunt. I figured it was more about team bonding or just something fun to do after a long week of competitions. I didn't think it was real. Even when people told stories, I smiled and nodded. I thought they were exaggerating. That changed last fall. We got back from a regional DECA trip one Friday night. It was already late, around 9:45 or so, when we pulled into the school parking lot. Most of the building was dark, just the front office lights and a few security floodlights still on. Everyone was tired, but Mr. R was grinning when he got off the bus. He said, "Anyone want to go check out the auditorium?" I laughed, but 5 or 6 of us said yes. I thought it would just be fun, nothing more. We walked in through the side entrance. The school was cold at night. You could feel how empty it was. All the laughter and chaos from daytime was gone. The hallways felt too wide. Our footsteps echoed like we were walking through a tunnel. The doors creaked in a way they didn't during the day. The ceiling lights flickered like they were trying to decide whether to stay on or not. We got to the auditorium through the back door that leads near the dressing rooms. Mr. R unlocked it with a key he had on his personal keyring. No one else was in the school. It was locked up. The janitors had gone home. The lights in the auditorium were off, but some emergency lights gave it this soft reddish glow that made everything look grainy and strange. We walked down the aisle toward the stage. I remember hearing the sound of someone's backpack zipper, and it made me jump. It was just that quiet in there. The first thing that happened was the spears. There's this big plastic barrel backstage where all the props get stored. It's packed with fake weapons from school plays, swords, shields, spears, that sort of thing. While we were just kind of milling around, talking, something crashed backstage. Loud, like a dozen metal poles hitting the ground all at once. Everyone froze. We rushed over, and sure enough, the entire barrel of spears was on the ground, scattered everywhere. The weird part wasn't just that they fell, it was the way they fell. The barrel had been against the wall. There was nothing around it, no people, no strings, no sloped floors. But the spears weren't just on the ground next to it. They were spread in all directions, like something had knocked it over hard. We turned on the flashlight from someone's phone and checked the trapdoor under the stage. It was still padlocked shut from the outside. You could tell no one had opened it in weeks. Dust and cobwebs were still on it. There was no way anyone was under there. But we all heard it. Mr. looked at the spears, didn't say anything, just told us to keep close together. Another night, maybe a month later, a few of us went back. This time it was just me, Mr. R, and 2 others. The building was dead quiet again. We went in through the same door and walked straight to the auditorium. Everything looked normal, but when we got to the middle of the stage, we heard something fall again, this metallic clatter from the far right wing. We went to check and found an old metal bucket on the ground. It wasn't just tipped over, it had landed maybe 8 feet away from the shelf it had been sitting on. That shelf was high up. We had to stand on a chair to put it back up there. The bucket wasn't light either. It was one of those heavy mop buckets. There's no way it just fell. The shelf was flat. It had been sitting there for weeks. Again, we checked for anyone else. Nothing. No doors were open, no windows. Mr. R didn't even bother trying to explain it this time. He just said, "Let's go." Then came the night with the chair. That one stuck with me the most. We had just finished setting up some decorations for a DECA event. We stayed late again until around 10. As we were leaving the auditorium, Mr. R sat down in one of the chairs in the front row near the middle aisle. He was tired, said he needed a second to catch his breath. We all waited with him for maybe a minute. Then he stood up, stretched, and we started walking out. We were halfway to the doors when I turned around. I don't even know why. I just felt like someone was behind us. When I looked, the chair he'd been sitting in was rocking. Not a lot, not in a crazy way, but enough. Like someone had just stood up from it. It didn't make any sense. He'd been up for at least 30 seconds. Nobody else had touched the chair. The floor was carpeted. There was no draft, and yet it was moving. I didn't say anything at first. I just watched it until it stopped. Then I nudged the others. They saw it too. We all stood there staring. No one spoke. No one made a joke. It wasn't ghosts. I still don't think it's ghosts. I don't believe in that. But something's wrong with that school. It's not just old pipes or wind through the vents. It's not just stories passed down from upperclassmen. I've seen too much now. I've heard too many things. And it's not just me. Teachers don't stay late unless they have to. Janitors clean in pairs. Security guards don't even patrol the whole building, just the main hallways and offices. Mr. R says the auditorium is the worst, but I've heard from others that the basement is just as bad. One science teacher said she was working late and heard what sounded like someone pacing in the hall outside her classroom. She opened the door, and the hallway was empty. Another said the janitor closet slammed shut when no one was near it. Brick room, no hiding spaces, no reason for that door to even move. What makes it worse is that there's no big story behind it. No kid who died in the pool, no tragic fire, no record of anything awful ever happening there. It's just a regular school with too many moments that don't make sense. I still walk those halls every day. I still go to class. I still laugh and talk and hang out like it's nothing. But sometimes when the bell rings, or when I'm alone for a second between classes, I feel like someone's behind me, not watching, just there. And the nights we go ghost hunting, I don't even joke about it anymore. I still go, but I don't laugh. I keep my hands out of my pockets, and I stay alert. I listen for the small noises, the kind you don't notice unless you're really paying attention. Whatever's going on in that school, it's real, and I don't think it's going away. Six years ago, when I was 19, I stayed the night at my two best friends' house. Their room was small, just enough space for a full-sized bed and a chest of drawers pushed up against one wall. We were all squeezed together on the bed, me on the edge, one friend in the middle, and the other pressed against the wall. It was the kind of night where we stayed up talking too long, watching random videos, and eating junk food until we couldn't keep our eyes open anymore. I remember the ceiling fan humming above us and the soft orange glow of the streetlight coming in from the gap between the curtains. It wasn't pitch dark in the room, but it was dim enough that I could barely make out the shape of the furniture once the lights were off. At some point during the night, I woke up. I didn't sit up or move suddenly. I just opened my eyes. It felt like something had pulled me out of sleep, like how you sometimes wake up suddenly for no reason and know it's not just to pee or because of a noise. I was lying on my side, facing the middle of the room, and I blinked a couple times to get my eyes to adjust. Everything looked quiet. I could hear both of my friends breathing beside me, slow and steady, completely asleep. Then I saw her. There was a girl standing at the foot of the bed. She looked like she was maybe 6 or 7 years old. She was small, wearing something pale, maybe a nightgown or maybe just a light-colored dress. I couldn't tell the color in that low light, but it looked soft and plain, like the kind of clothes little kids wear to bed. Her hair was shoulder length, dark, maybe a bit messy. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I could tell she was staring right at us. Not moving, just staring. At first, I didn't react. I didn't even blink. I thought maybe I was dreaming or maybe it was sleep paralysis, but I could move my fingers. I shifted my foot under the blanket. I could breathe normally. I could feel the bed under me and the warmth from my friends beside me. I wasn't frozen. I was awake, but I didn't move. I was too scared to do anything. I just stared at her. She didn't make a sound. She didn't blink. She didn't step forward or backward. Just stood there. The seconds stretched on forever. My heart was pounding so hard that I could feel it in my throat, but I didn't make a sound. I didn't even want to breathe too loud. There was something about how still she was that felt completely unnatural. Not supernatural, just wrong. Like she shouldn't be there. Like the room had been normal and now it wasn't. Then, as quietly as she appeared, she just started to fade. Not like she vanished in a flash or turned into smoke or anything dramatic. It was like a shadow moving, like something slipping out of sight behind your eyes, like your brain slowly deciding it didn't need to see her anymore. 1 second she was there, and the next second the space where she had been was just empty again. The foot of the bed was empty. The room was exactly how it had been when we went to sleep. I stayed awake for the rest of the night. I stared at that spot where she had stood for what felt like hours. My eyes hurt from not blinking, but I couldn't stop looking. I kept listening for any sounds. Footsteps, whispers, anything. But the room stayed completely silent except for the occasional snore from one of my friends. At some point, I must have dozed off out of pure exhaustion because I remember waking up again when the sunlight came in stronger through the window. I didn't say anything that morning. I helped fold the blankets, we made coffee, and we talked about dumb stuff like school and work and shows we were watching. I didn't tell them what I saw. Couldn't. I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't even know if I had really seen it or if I had been half asleep and dreaming with my eyes open. The memory stayed sharp in my mind though. I kept replaying it every night for weeks after. I thought maybe it would fade with time, but it never did. I didn't talk about it for months. Then, one night when I was hanging out with the same two friends, they started telling me something weird that had happened to them a few weeks earlier. They said they were in their room, the same one we had all slept in that night, and it was late, probably past midnight. They were both in bed scrolling on their phones when they heard something. Laughter, children laughing, but it wasn't coming from outside or from another room in the house. It sounded like it was coming from the living room, just outside their bedroom door. At first they thought it was the TV, but everything was off. They muted their phones and listened. The laughter came again, light, high-pitched, playful, not loud but clear. They said they got up and walked to the bedroom door slowly, trying to listen better. Just as they reached the door, something hit it. A loud thunk, not like a knock, more like a solid thud, like someone had thrown something at it or hit it with a hand or shoulder. They both jumped and opened the door quickly, expecting to see someone in the hallway. But when they looked, there was nothing. The house was completely still. They checked every room. All the doors were locked. No windows were open. Nothing had fallen. They even checked the backyard. There was no one there. That's when I finally told them what I saw. I didn't dramatize it or try to make it sound like a movie. I just told them exactly what I saw, how I woke up, saw the girl standing at the foot of the bed, how she didn't move, how she just faded out. I told them I had been too scared to move or say anything and too unsure to talk about it afterward. We were all quiet after that. There wasn't any explanation that made sense. They didn't accuse me of lying, but none of us really knew what to say. It was like we had all seen something or felt something in that room at different times and just didn't want to believe it was real. After that, I didn't sleep over at their house again. We stayed friends and everything, but I always made sure to head home before it got too late. They didn't bring it up again, and neither did I. But it stuck with me. Still does. Looking back on it now, I still don't know what I saw. I've thought about every logical explanation I could come up with. Maybe I was half asleep and my brain pulled some kind of leftover image from a dream and put it into the room. Maybe there was a shadow or some light trick playing with my eyes. Maybe stress or lack of sleep made me hallucinate. Maybe the girl was a memory from something I saw on TV or in a photo. I've read about hypnagogic hallucinations, those things you see when you're between sleep and waking, and it sounds kind of like that. But none of the explanations feel like enough. It wasn't just seeing her. It was how I felt. The dread, the wrongness in the room, that sudden cold drop in my stomach when I saw her face. The way my body froze even though I wasn't paralyzed. And then my friends hearing laughter and something hitting their door a few months later. It didn't feel like coincidence. Still, I don't believe in ghosts. I never really have. I think the mind is powerful and strange and does things we don't fully understand. But I also know what I saw. I remember every second of it. It was the scariest thing I've ever experienced, not because it was violent or dramatic, but because it felt real and quiet and out of place in the middle of a normal night in a normal room. Even now, whenever I sleep in a new place or in a friend's room, I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, and I always check the foot of the bed. I never see anything, but I always look. A few years back, I was living with my sister for a while. Her and her boyfriend had gotten into some kind of big fight, and he had moved out temporarily. She didn't want to be alone in the apartment, said the place felt weird when it was just her, especially at night. I didn't mind. It was better than my old setup, free Wi-Fi, food in the fridge, and a decent couch to crash on. I worked night shifts at the time, so I was usually the one coming in around 3 or 4 a.m. and crashing on the couch in the living room. The setup was pretty basic. There was the main couch right by the window where I usually slept, and another one against the opposite wall near the front door. A coffee table in the middle, TV in the corner. No fancy decorations or anything, just a normal apartment. This one night, I remember everything too clearly. I'd gotten home late, even later than usual. Must have been close to 5 in the morning. I didn't bother turning on any lights, just dumped my stuff by the wall and crashed straight on the couch like I always did. I remember being completely wiped out, the kind of tired where your limbs feel heavy and your brain starts skipping. I think I passed out the moment my head hit the armrest. I don't remember the dream that woke me up. I don't even know if it was a dream or just some jolt that hit my chest and yanked me awake. But I remember the feeling. My heart was thudding like I'd been running, and my mouth was dry. I sat up fast, breathing heavy, trying to figure out what was going on. The room was mostly dark, but the streetlight outside threw in just enough orange glow through the window to see the basic shapes of things. I sat there for a second, letting my eyes adjust, rubbing my face and trying to shake the leftover fear that clung to me. That's when I looked across the room. At first I thought my eyes were still adjusting. There was someone, sitting on the couch by the front door. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't blink, just sat there staring. It wasn't moving either, just sitting there, still as stone. I thought maybe it was my sister's boyfriend. Maybe he came back without saying anything. But no, the shape was wrong. It was tall, too tall. The shoulders were wide and hunched slightly forward. And it wasn't just the shape, it was what it was wearing. This long, dark robe, almost black. The hood was pulled forward, and I couldn't see a face at all. It had its arms crossed tight over its chest, tucked into the sleeves. The longer I looked, the clearer it got. The sharp point of the hood, the way the fabric folded over itself like something heavy. I wasn't dreaming. I was awake. I could feel the cold of the room. I could hear the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. My mouth tasted sour. I was there. This was happening. Everything in my body told me to run. But another part of me, the stupid part that's probably why people get stabbed in horror movies, wanted to protect my sister. I didn't know what the hell I was looking at, but if it was a person, I wasn't gonna let them do anything while I was in the house. I stood up, slow and quiet, not taking my eyes off the thing. Still didn't move, not even a twitch. I took a shaky step backward toward the hallway. My legs felt like they were moving through mud. I finally reached the doorway into the kitchen and grabbed the first thing I could find. A basketball of all things. It had been sitting by the trash can for weeks and somehow ended up in my hand like that was going to help. I stood there, clutching it to my chest, trying to slow my breathing and tell myself to stop panicking. I stood there for a long time, too long. Eventually, I started to doubt myself. Maybe it wasn't anything. Maybe I was seeing a pile of clothes, a shadow, something that made sense. My brain was desperate for something normal. I told myself, out loud in my head, that it was just a trick of the light. Maybe my sister had thrown some coats on the couch before bed. That had to be it. Eventually, I forced myself to go check. I was so tense that my body ached. I moved through the hallway slowly, holding that stupid basketball tight enough to hurt my fingers. My bare feet made no sound on the tile floor. As I reached the edge of the living room again, I hovered there for a second. The couch was empty, nothing on it, not even a blanket. No coat, no hoodie, no dark clothes, just the bare cushions. I stared for a while, thinking maybe something fell off, slid to the floor. I looked behind it, checked around it. Nothing. There wasn't even anything that could have looked like a hooded figure. No piles of dark laundry. No shadows strong enough to play tricks like that. It was just a clean, empty couch. I stood there longer than I needed to, trying to make sense of it. I turned the light on. I scanned the whole room, looked at every corner, opened the front door just to see if the lock was still bolted. And it was. Everything looked exactly the way it should have. I didn't tell my sister, didn't even hint at it. What was I supposed to say? Hey, I hallucinated a 7-foot-tall monk in the living room? I didn't want to freak her out, especially when she was already on edge about being alone. I didn't sleep well the rest of the week. I stayed up late with the lights on most nights. Some nights I just sat on the couch pretending to scroll through my phone while staring at that same empty spot. I never saw it again. Whatever it was, it never came back. Or maybe it was never there to begin with. A few months later, I moved back into my old place. My sister patched things up with her boyfriend, and I didn't really have a reason to stay. But I never forgot that night. It burned into my memory like a brand. Even now, every time I crash on a couch in the dark, doesn't matter whose house or how comfortable, I always glance across the room, just to check, just to be sure. Because that night, I know what I saw. It wasn't sleep paralysis. I could move. It wasn't a dream. I woke up, walked, held something, turned on lights. I know the difference. And the worst part isn't what I saw. It's that nothing was there at all. I was 15 at the time, still living with my parents in the house I'd grown up in. We had a finished basement, and since I was getting older and wanted more privacy, my parents let me move my bed and stuff down there. It wasn't anything fancy, just a converted room with a small bed, a nightstand, a worn-out couch, and my desk tucked into a corner. The whole room had this weird layout. Part of it was kind of tucked behind a wall near the staircase, so if someone was sitting on the couch, I wouldn't see them unless I sat up or leaned out a bit. That detail would matter later. It was around 3 in the morning. I'd taken my usual sleeping meds around midnight and had passed out hard. I don't remember what exactly woke me, but I became aware of this low moaning sound. Not like sleep talking, not like a creaking floor or the house settling. This was a deep, slow sound. It didn't register immediately. I was half asleep and groggy, my brain trying to figure out whether it was part of a dream or not. I lay there in the dark, blinking, trying to fully wake up. The sound wasn't stopping. It wasn't rhythmic or predictable, just these strange moans, like someone in pain or distress. My first thought was that it was coming from outside, like maybe a cat or something got hurt. But then I noticed the direction of the sound. It was coming from inside the room, specifically from the couch, which I couldn't see from the angle my bed was in. First, I didn't move. I just stared at the ceiling, trying to listen closely. The meds were still fogging my head, and I felt frozen, like my limbs hadn't caught up to my brain. I was confused more than scared. I thought maybe I was hearing something that wasn't really there. You know how the brain plays tricks on you when you're just waking up. But the moaning didn't stop. Eventually, I sat up slowly and leaned to the side, just enough to see past the corner of the wall. I saw legs stretched out on the floor in front of the couch. Jeans, shoes. At first, I thought it was my friend from earlier that day. We had hung out, watched a movie, played some video games. He'd left around 10 p.m., so it seemed weird, but I figured maybe he'd stayed longer and crashed on the couch without telling me. But then something didn't line up. The shoes were similar but not quite the same, and the jeans were dirtier, frayed in some places. I leaned forward more, and that's when I saw his face. He wasn't my friend. My friend's Greek, lighter-skinned, and clean-shaven. This guy had darker skin, facial hair, and his eyes were half closed, like he was drifting in and out of consciousness. Everything went still in that moment. The sleepiness drained out of me in an instant, and I just sat there, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I didn't know who he was, how he got in, or why he was in my basement. He hadn't seen me yet. The lights were off. I was tucked behind that wall. My nightstand was next to me, and I remembered I had this 3-inch folding knife sitting in the drawer. I'd never used it. It was mostly just a thing I kept around because I thought it was cool. But right then, it felt like my only option. My first thought was that I should go for the knife and attack him before he noticed me. But something held me back. Maybe instinct, maybe fear. I remembered that the basement door, because it had once been a separate entrance, had a lock on the outside. The kind you'd find on a utility closet or a storage room. If I could get out of the room and close the door, I could trap him in. I moved carefully, slowly pulling the blanket off, trying not to make any noise. But as I started to shift off the bed, my mattress creaked. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. The moaning stopped. I heard sudden movement, a thump, then a shuffle. I didn't wait. I bolted off the bed and sprinted for the stairs. I heard him react, his shoes scuffing against the floor, a heavy footstep, then more behind me. He was chasing me. I could hear the difference between our footsteps. Mine were faster, frantic. His were uneven, like he was struggling to keep his balance. Still, he was close. I hit the stairs, took them 2 at a time, and slammed the door shut behind me just as he lunged. I twisted the lock on the outside and heard the knob rattle almost immediately. Then a loud bang. He was slamming his body against it. I didn't wait to see if the door would hold. I flew up the 2nd flight of stairs and burst into my parents' bedroom. I was shaking so hard I could barely speak. I tried to tell them what had happened, but they thought I was having a nightmare. They were half asleep and confused. I kept trying to explain it, but I could tell they weren't fully believing me. Still, my dad got up, muttering about checking things out. My mom followed behind. As we got to the main floor, approaching the basement door, there was a loud cracking sound. Something heavy slammed into the door from inside. A second later, the edge of a 10-pound dumbbell broke through the wood near the handle. That's when everything changed. My mom gasped and stumbled back. My dad turned and yelled at me to call the police. She grabbed the phone before I could even move. While she called, my dad went over to this old decorative suit of armor we kept in the living room. It wasn't a full suit, just the chest and helmet on a stand, with a broadsword that looked more ornamental than functional. But it was solid metal, and that was better than nothing. He took it off the stand, held it tight, and told me to grab the cavalry saber we kept in the umbrella stand by the front door. Yeah, we're that kind of weird family, collectors of random historical stuff. I didn't question it. I grabbed the saber and held it like I had a clue how to use it. We stood near the basement door, waiting, just listening. Every few seconds, the guy would slam into the door or throw something else against it. The noise was brutal, angry grunts, the thud of fists, scraping sounds. The door was cracked and splintering but still holding. The police arrived 5 minutes later. They came in fast, guns out, voices commanding. My mom pointed them to the basement door. They lined up, shouted a warning, then kicked it open. It didn't even take much. The door was already halfway broken. What followed was chaos. The man inside tried to lunge at the first officer, but they took him down hard. Took 3 of them to hold him. He was fighting like a wild animal, screaming nonsense, foaming at the mouth a little. He wasn't injured, just totally out of it. Later, they told us he was high on PCP, which made sense. He didn't feel pain, wasn't thinking clearly, and had the strength of someone not in control of their body. They asked us questions, lots of them, checked the broken basement window where he got in. Glass was everywhere. Apparently, he'd thrown himself through it, probably thinking he was escaping something or chasing something that didn't exist. That part chilled me. The fact that he was so gone he had no idea what he was doing. The officers said technically we'd made a citizen's arrest by locking him in. My dad joked that we were lucky the sword didn't have to come into play. I didn't laugh. Couldn't. I felt cold for the rest of the night. Shaky, like the fear had soaked into my bones. They took him away in cuffs. We gave our statements. I went to sleep on the couch upstairs, lights on. My parents stayed up the rest of the night. We had a guy come board up the broken window the next day, and we replaced the basement door with something stronger. I didn't sleep downstairs again after that. Moved my stuff back into my old room within a week. For a while, I kept thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't woken up, or if I hadn't gotten to the door in time, if I'd tried to fight him with that little knife, or worse, if he'd found me before I found him. That thought stuck with me. I never knew his name, never saw him again. Just a stranger in the night, high on drugs, breaking into the wrong house at the wrong time. And I just happened to be the one sleeping 10 feet away. It happened in the summer of 2009, a few weeks before the start of my final year in college. I had gone back to my parents' house during a short break. They had moved into this new place after I left for school, so it didn't really feel like home to me. I had only been there a couple of times before, and even then, I always had this strange feeling about the place. It was much bigger than where I grew up. A 4-bedroom house with 2.5 bathrooms, a large living room, and a 2-car garage. It was in a quiet neighborhood, not exactly rural, but spread out enough that you could go a whole afternoon without seeing anyone walk by. That day was a Saturday, hot and bright. I remember the sunlight pouring through the living room windows like it was trying to bleach the furniture. I had been up late the night before watching movies and eating junk food, so I was still groggy when I crashed on the couch sometime around noon. The living room had a wide, L-shaped couch, and I laid out across it with a pillow under my head and a throw blanket barely covering my legs. It was so quiet in the house, aside from the faint ticking of a wall clock and the occasional groan of the air conditioning. I must have dozed off for 30 minutes or so, because when I opened my eyes again, the sunlight had shifted a little on the wall. I was still half asleep, that in-between state where you're not sure if something is real or a leftover sound from a dream. But what I heard was distinct. A metallic rattle like a doorknob being turned back and forth. It wasn't aggressive, more like someone quietly trying to open a locked door. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes, listening. The sound had stopped. At first, I figured maybe it was my dad. His office was just 10 minutes away, and sometimes he'd come home in the middle of the day if he forgot something. I remembered he had trouble with the upstairs bathroom doorknobs before, the kind where you push in and twist to lock. He had accidentally locked himself in there a few times already. Thinking he might have done it again, I dragged myself off the couch and started up the stairs. The steps were carpeted, and the whole house had this kind of hollow, echoey quiet to it, the kind you only get when it's built big but still sort of empty. I called out a soft, "Hey," more just to make noise than anything. No answer. At the top of the stairs, I checked the bedroom doors. Every single one of them was wide open. The bathroom, too. No lights on, no bags, no jacket thrown over a chair. Nothing to indicate anyone had been there. I stood there for a minute, trying to shake off the uneasiness. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just a noise from outside that got twisted in my half-sleeping brain. The sun was still pouring through the windows upstairs, lighting everything up bright and clear, but I still felt weird standing there, like I had just interrupted something. I walked back down, trying to be rational. The house made all sorts of sounds. It was newer construction but big, and the vents or water pipes sometimes echoed in weird ways. I turned on the TV, just for the noise, and curled back up on the couch. I remember watching some cooking show, something I normally wouldn't care about, but it was comforting. Loud voices, clinking pans, nothing creepy about it. Maybe another hour passed. The sun was fully on the other side of the living room now, and it had gotten warmer despite the AC. I was half asleep again, just drifting, when I heard it. This time it was different. The sound was louder, more deliberate. A rapid, almost violent rattling of a doorknob upstairs. The TV was still on, but even over that I heard it, like someone was frantically trying to get into a locked room. It lasted a few seconds, stopped, then started again. I sat bolt upright. My skin prickled, and I felt this deep, immediate fear in my chest. I muted the TV and just listened. Silence. No footsteps, no voices, no creaks on the stairs. Just dead quiet. I reached for my phone and called my dad first. He answered on the second ring. He was still at work. I tried to keep my voice normal but couldn't stop it from shaking a little. I asked if he'd come home at all that day. He said no. Then I called my mom. She was at her office too, had been there all morning. I didn't say much, just that I was checking in. I sat on the couch, staring at the staircase. Every instinct I had was screaming to get out of the house. I thought about going upstairs to check again, just to prove to myself that I wasn't losing it. But I couldn't move. The air in the room felt heavy, not hot exactly, but like something was pushing down on me. I sat there for a few minutes, phone in hand, TV still muted, not blinking. Then I heard a soft creak from upstairs. Just one, like someone had stepped in place. That was enough. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, slipped on my shoes without even tying them, and walked straight out the front door. I didn't slam it. I didn't want to make noise. I didn't even lock it behind me. I got in my car, started the engine, and just drove. I didn't really know where I was going, just anywhere but there. I ended up at a strip mall parking lot about 10 minutes away and sat there for almost an hour with the AC on full blast, trying to stop my hands from shaking. Eventually, I called my dad again. I didn't want to tell him the whole thing over the phone, so I just asked when he'd be home. He said around 6. I waited until then, met both my parents back at the house, and told them what had happened. I expected them to laugh, maybe say I'd been dreaming or that it was just the house settling or something. But my dad got quiet. Then he said something that I still think about. He said he had heard the same thing once. A few weeks after they moved in, he was home alone on a Sunday morning and heard what sounded like someone trying to open one of the bedroom doors upstairs. He thought maybe a window was open and the wind had caught the door somehow. But when he went up, every window was shut. He never mentioned it because he didn't want to freak my mom out. My mom didn't say anything for a while, then told us both that sometimes, when she was home alone, she'd get this weird feeling that someone was walking around upstairs. She never heard anything, just felt it. Nothing ever actually happened, nothing concrete. No missing items, no damage, no proof of anyone ever being inside. But all three of us had felt it, heard it in different ways. After that, I never stayed alone in that house again. Even years later, when they eventually sold it and moved again, I still remember the way it felt in there. Not haunted, not evil, just wrong, in some subtle way that made your body tense and your brain alert without knowing why. To this day, that was the only time I ever ran out of a house in broad daylight, in the middle of a hot summer afternoon, heart pounding like I'd seen something truly terrifying, when all I heard was the rattle of a doorknob behind a locked door that didn't exist.